Hello, everyone. I am the storyteller, and welcome to the Haunting Night. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax or fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Before you drift off, let's begin. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from?
Mira had always found old mirrors fascinating. Their warped glass, the way they captured light differently, there was something almost mystical about them. So, when she found an antique mirror at a flea market, she didn't hesitate to buy it. It had an ornate blackened frame with intricate carvings of roses and thorns. The glass was slightly tarnished, but it gave the reflection a ghostly, dreamlike quality. The vendor, an elderly woman with clouded eyes, had hesitated before selling it. "This mirror is unusual," she said. "Are you sure you want it?" Mira laughed. "That's exactly why I want it." The woman sighed, but took the money. "If you hear something at night, don't look into it." Mira frowned, but before she could ask what that meant, the woman turned away. That night, as the rain pattered against her window, Mira set up the mirror in her bedroom. She admired her reflection, tilting her head from side to side. There was something strangely captivating about it. At around midnight, she woke up to a faint noise. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap. She sat up, blinking sleepily. The sound was coming from the mirror. She turned on her bedside lamp and looked toward it. The glass was dark, almost black, but nothing seemed out of place. Probably just her imagination. She sighed and lay back down. The next morning, she shrugged it off, blaming fatigue, but the tapping returned the following night. This time, she was fully awake. She turned toward the mirror, heart pounding. The glass looked deeper, like an open window rather than a reflection. The tapping grew louder. Then, something moved. A shape shifted in the darkness of the glass. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She scrambled for her phone, using the screen's glow to illuminate the room. The moment light touched the mirror, the movement stopped. The glass returned to normal. She didn't sleep after that. By the next day, exhaustion made her question what she had seen. Had it been a trick of the light? Maybe she was just scaring herself. That night, she decided to test it. She sat in front of the mirror with a flashlight, her phone set to record. If something moved, she'd catch it. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent, except for the rain outside. Then, as the clock struck 3 a.m., the tapping returned. This time, it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like someone knocking from the other side. Mira's breath hitched, her fingers tightened around the flashlight. The glass darkened, and then she saw it. A figure, not her reflection. A man, standing just behind the surface of the glass. His face was pale, almost gray, his eyes black voids, his lips curled into a smile, too wide, too unnatural. Mira gasped, dropping the flashlight. The screen of her phone flickered. A voice whispered, "Let me out." Mira bolted out of her chair, heart hammering. She grabbed a sheet and threw it over the mirror, her entire body trembling. She barely slept that night. The next morning, she debated getting rid of it, but something held her back. It was just a mirror, just a trick of the mind. That night, she left the sheet on. She refused to acknowledge it. At exactly 3 a.m., her phone screen lit up, a notification. She frowned, picking it up. Her stomach dropped. It was a photo of her sleeping, taken from inside the mirror. Mira screamed, throwing the phone across the room. The sheet over the mirror fluttered, as if something inside had moved. She couldn't stay. She grabbed her keys and ran, not stopping until she was outside, rain pouring down on her. She spent the night in her car. By morning, she returned cautiously. The sheet was on the floor. The mirror was shattered, but there was something worse. On the wall, right where the mirror had been, 4 words were scrawled in dripping black ink. "I'm not in there." Mira never found out where he had gone. She never stayed in that apartment again. It was just past midnight when Anna's phone buzzed, waking her from a deep, restless sleep. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was a number she didn't recognize. No name, just a string of random digits. Confused and groggy, she considered ignoring it. But something compelled her to answer. Maybe it was the fact that she had just moved into her new apartment, and the solitude made her anxious. Or maybe she just needed to hear another voice. "Hello," she said, her voice thick with sleep. There was no response at first, only the sound of static, followed by a deep, uneven breathing. Anna's pulse quickened, her gut instinct telling her something was wrong. She was about to hang up when a voice emerged from the other end, soft but chillingly clear. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a greeting, it was a statement, one that made her feel like her skin was crawling. She sat up straighter in bed, clutching her phone tightly. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. There was a long pause, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of the city. Then the voice came again, this time with a cold edge. "You don't remember me, do you?" Anna's mind raced. She didn't recognize the voice, but something about it made her feel uneasy, as if it was someone from her past. She couldn't place it, couldn't connect the dots. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know who you are," she said firmly, though she felt a sense of dread creeping over her. The person on the other end of the line laughed, a short, bitter laugh that made Anna's stomach twist. "You should remember me, Anna. I remember you." Suddenly, Anna felt a wave of panic. She wanted to hang up, to end this strange, unsettling conversation, but her fingers felt glued to the phone. She couldn't move. There was something in the way the voice spoke to her, something familiar yet off, that kept her trapped in this strange moment. "I don't know you," Anna repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember the fire, Anna?" the voice asked. "The one that killed your family?" The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She froze. Her family, the fire. It had been years since that night, that horrible night when she lost everything. She had been the only one to survive, and the trauma of that night had haunted her ever since. The fire had been ruled an accident, but deep down she had always wondered if there was more to it. Now hearing those words, hearing them on the other end of the phone, it was as if that night was coming back to life. "Who are you?" Anna gasped, panic rising in her chest. "You don't remember, do you?" the voice said, its tone turning colder, darker. "You don't remember me because you were too young, but I remember you, Anna. I remember everything." Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to breathe. She was no longer sure if she was dreaming, or if this was real. She couldn't understand why this person was calling her, why they knew about the fire, why they knew her name. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I want you to remember," the voice replied. "I want you to remember what you did." Anna's mind went blank. What she did? She had no idea what the caller was talking about. The only thing she remembered clearly was the fire, the terrifying images of her parents trapped inside their burning home, the way the smoke had filled her lungs, suffocating her, the heat that had burned her skin as she barely managed to escape. But she had never done anything, had she? The voice on the phone chuckled again, a low, mocking sound. "You really don't remember? How convenient. You've been running from it for so long, haven't you?" "Running from what?" Anna whispered. From the other end of the line, a series of clicks echoed through the receiver, as if the caller was pressing buttons or typing. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating, like something was about to be revealed. Finally, the voice returned, softer now, almost tender. "You should have died that night, Anna. You shouldn't have survived." The words sent a chill down her spine. Her breath hitched in her throat. This wasn't just some prank call. Whoever was on the other end of the line knew far too much about her. They knew about the fire, about her survival, and now they were telling her that she should have died that night. You're lying," Anna said, her voice weak, trying to convince herself more than anyone else. "I'm not lying," the voice replied, its tone calm, almost soothing. "I'm the one who made sure you survived. I saved you." Anna's heart stopped, her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Who was this person? How could they claim to have saved her? And why were they tormenting her now? "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Why are you calling me?" "To remind you," the voice said, "to remind you that I've been watching you all these years. I've been waiting for the moment when you'd finally remember." The room felt colder, darker, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. The phone in her hand felt heavier, as if it had taken on a life of its own, pulling her deeper into whatever nightmare this was. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the line went silent. Anna waited, holding her breath, expecting the voice to come back. But there was nothing. Not a sound, not a breath, just silence. She sat there for what felt like an eternity, the phone still pressed against her ear. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and a growing sense of dread. She should have called the police, should have done something, but she didn't. She couldn't. She was paralyzed by the terror of it all. The phone buzzed again. This time, when she looked at the screen, it was a message, the same strange number. The text read, "I'm still here, waiting for you to remember. Don't keep me waiting too long. Anna." Story 13. The lurking shadow. Henry had always considered himself a rational man. He prided himself on his ability to think logically, to dismiss the superstitions and fears that so many people seem to cling to. Ghosts, nonsense. Monsters under the bed, ridiculous. He had no time for such things. But when he moved into his new apartment, something began to change. It started with small things, odd noises in the middle of the night, the creak of the floorboards, a tap on the window when there was no one outside. At first he brushed it off as the quirks of an old building, but as the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent and more disturbing. One night, after a particularly long day at work, Henry was preparing for bed when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. A shadow. It was quick, darting across the hallway, just beyond the reach of the light from his bedroom. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. He told himself it was just his imagination. He was tired, stressed, but that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The shadows in his room seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting and shifting in ways they shouldn't. He pulled the covers tighter around himself, but the sensation of being watched only grew stronger. The next night, the shadow returned. This time it was clearer, more defined. It moved along the walls, its shape tall and menacing, stretching unnaturally. As it slid across the room, Henry's pulse raced. He tried to tell himself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. The shadow didn't stop there. It began to appear more frequently, at all hours of the day and night, lurking just out of his direct line of sight, always in the corner of his vision. It was as if it was waiting for him to notice, to acknowledge its presence. But the moment he did, it would vanish, slipping back into the darkness. Henry couldn't take it any longer. He had to do something. He began researching, looking for any explanation, anything that could explain the strange happenings in his apartment. And that's when he found it. An old legend, a tale of a man who had once lived in the building. A man who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some said he had been consumed by the shadows. Others whispered that he had become one with them. Henry didn't believe it. Of course, it was just a story. But as the days passed, the shadows grew bolder. They weren't content to linger in the corners anymore. They were following him, watching him. One evening, after an exhausting day, Henry finally reached his breaking point. He walked into the living room, determined to confront whatever it was that had been haunting him. But when he turned on the lights, the room was empty. No shadow, no lurking presence. Relieved, he sat down on the couch, trying to shake off the overwhelming feeling of unease. But then from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A figure. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a man. A tall, thin figure, with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. It moved toward him, its limbs twisting unnaturally. As it approached, Henry tried to scream, but the words caught in his throat. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was paralyzed, trapped by the thing he had ignored for so long. And then in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. The room was empty again, but Henry knew it wasn't over. The shadow was still there, waiting, lurking, just beyond the light, and it was only a matter of time before it would claim him too. Sarah had always been a bit obsessed with her reflection. It wasn't vanity, at least, not in the traditional sense. She didn't spend hours admiring herself or worrying about every little imperfection. No, for Sarah, it was the curiosity of it all, the way the mirror captured her in such perfect stillness, as if time had paused the moment she looked into it. But lately, her reflections had been different. It started subtly. At first it was just a flicker, like her reflection wasn't quite in sync with her movements. She'd reach for something on the counter, and in the mirror she'd see her hand freeze for a split second before continuing the motion. She didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just fatigue. But the oddities continued. One morning Sarah was getting ready for work, brushing her teeth in front of the bathroom mirror, when she noticed something strange. In the reflection, her face was smiling, but Sarah wasn't smiling. She frowned, confused. She watched transfixed, as her reflection's smile grew wider, the expression more sinister. She turned away, trying to shake off the unease that had begun to settle in her chest, but the smile remained. It stayed in the mirror, even when she wasn't looking. Later that night, when she returned home, the feeling intensified. Her reflection had become more erratic, more unsettling. It seemed to do things she didn't, blink when she didn't, move when she stayed still. And then one night, it spoke to her. "You're not supposed to be here," her reflection whispered, its voice cold and hollow. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart racing. The reflection in the mirror was still, but the words hung in the air like a thick fog. She tried to laugh it off. "It's just a trick of the light," she whispered to herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something in that mirror was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Then one night, the reflection reached out, slowly, deliberately, its hand pressed against the glass, just as Sarah did in front of the mirror. But then its fingers curled in an unnatural way, as though the reflection were trying to escape. The glass began to crack. The small town of Mill Road had always been a quiet place, a place where the people knew each other, where the local coffee shop served the best cinnamon rolls, and where the most scandalous thing that had ever happened was a neighbor's dog running loose. But the residents knew there was something off about the house on the corner. The house had been abandoned for years, but it was always there, standing in the same spot, a dark shadow looming over the rest of the neighborhood. The house was old, its windows boarded up, and the wooden fence around the yard was slowly decaying. There were rumors, of course. Everyone knew that something wasn't right, but no one ever dared to investigate. For years, the house remained empty, its secrets locked away behind boarded windows and rotting doors. That is, until one fateful night, when Kevin moved to Mill Road. Kevin was young, eager to start a new chapter of his life. After a recent breakup had left him feeling lost,
He wasn't sure what drew him to Mill Road, the peace of the town, the quiet life, but it felt like the perfect place to escape the pain of his past. He found a small apartment not far from the abandoned house, and for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. But the house on the corner never left his mind. At night, when he would lie in bed, he would stare out his window at the dark silhouette of the house, wondering what had happened to make it so eerie. It seemed as if the house was watching him, waiting for something. The thought made him uneasy, but it also intrigued him. Was it just his imagination, or was there really something strange about the house? One evening, as Kevin was taking a walk around the neighborhood, he found himself standing in front of the abandoned house. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and rust, and the faintest sound of creaking could be heard from within. The front door, once a sturdy oak, was now hanging crookedly on its hinges. He couldn't resist the urge to step closer. As he neared the front yard, a chill ran down his spine. There was a feeling in the air, a tension that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the night. Kevin couldn't explain it, but he felt like he wasn't alone. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw a figure standing in the upper window, watching him. But when he blinked, the window was empty. Kevin shook his head, dismissing the thought. He had just been seeing things. But as he walked away, a voice seemed to call his name. It was faint, barely audible, but there it was. Kevin. He stopped dead in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no one around. His gaze turned back to the house. It looked the same, silent, dark, abandoned. But then, the door creaked open, just a crack. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. As he stepped closer, unsure of what to do, the door swung open wider, and in the dim light, Kevin could make out the shadow of a figure standing just inside. The figure's face was obscured by the darkness, but Kevin could feel its eyes on him. Come inside, the voice whispered again. The invitation sent a shiver down his spine. His instinct screamed at him to run, to turn and leave, but something held him there. The curiosity, the pull of the house, was too strong. He stepped inside. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The air grew thick with a suffocating darkness that seemed to press in from every angle. Kevin's breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. The house was cold, its floors creaking beneath his feet. Shadows danced along the walls, stretching and twisting like something alive. He turned, searching for the figure, but it was gone. The house was empty, silent, except for the eerie creaks and whispers that echoed through the rooms. Kevin's heart raced as he moved through the house. He passed through rooms filled with broken furniture, shattered glass, and peeling wallpaper. There was an unsettling stillness to it, like time had stopped. But there was something else, something off about the way the house felt. The walls seemed to pulse, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. He reached the staircase at the back of the house, its wooden steps groaning under his weight. As he ascended, the whispering grew louder. It was as if the house itself was speaking to him, urging him to go further, to explore deeper. At the top of the stairs, he found the room. It was small, its walls covered in strange symbols, and in the center of the room was an old wooden chair. But it was the mirror that caught Kevin's attention. It was large, framed in ornate gold, and it stood against the wall, as though it had been placed there deliberately. Kevin felt drawn to it. He stepped closer, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. But as he looked deeper, he saw something else. A figure, standing just behind him, watching him. His heart skipped a beat as he spun around, but the room was empty. The figure in the mirror was still there, though it wasn't his reflection anymore. The face staring back at him was pale and hollow, its eyes black as coal, its mouth twisted into a grin. And then the figure spoke. "Welcome home, Kevin." A cold hand gripped his shoulder from behind, and Kevin screamed, spinning around. But there was no one there. The mirror began to crack.
Jacob had always been someone who loved taking the road less traveled. He found solace in solitude, the freedom of driving long stretches of highway with no particular destination in mind. On a chilly autumn evening, with the fading orange of the setting sun reflecting off the rearview mirror. He decided to take a shortcut through a remote stretch of country roads. It was a familiar route to him, though he'd never been on this particular stretch before. The road was narrow, winding through dense trees that seemed to lean in, as if watching him drive by. The only sound in the car was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional creak of the steering wheel as Jacob steered around the turns. At first, everything seemed peaceful. The world outside the car felt quiet, untouched by time. But as the minutes passed, something about the road began to feel off. The trees, which once seemed serene, now appeared unnervingly still. The air outside was heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. The road stretched ahead endlessly, with no signs of civilization in sight. Jacob glanced at the fuel gauge, noticing that it was nearing empty, but he figured he'd find a gas station soon enough. Minutes turned into hours, and the landscape outside his window grew darker and more desolate. Jacob felt a pang of unease, but shrugged it off. Maybe it was just the isolation of the road getting to him. He thought about pulling over, maybe stretching his legs and grabbing a snack, but something made him push forward. The road ahead seemed to beckon him, drawing him deeper into the woods, further away from the world he knew. It wasn't until he noticed something strange that he began to question his decision. A flicker of light in the distance caught his eye. At first he thought it was a mirage, the reflection of his headlights playing tricks on him. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a car, another car. The lights of the vehicle were off, but the car itself was parked on the side of the road, almost as though waiting for someone. Jacob slowed down as he passed the vehicle, his headlights illuminating the empty, dark car on the roadside. The windows were fogged up, and the engine was cold, clearly turned off for a while. He thought about stopping to offer help, but something in the back of his mind told him to keep driving. There was an unsettling stillness about the situation, an eerie feeling that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He glanced in his rearview mirror, expecting to see the car behind him, but it was gone. At first he thought he might have missed it, but then as the minutes passed, he realized that the car was nowhere to be seen. He was alone once again on the road. As the road stretched on, the trees seemed to grow denser, and the night became more suffocating. His headlights flickered momentarily, and for a split second, everything around him went dark. When the lights came back on, he saw something he hadn't noticed before, an unfamiliar road sign that appeared out of nowhere, standing tall in the middle of nowhere. The sign was old and weathered, its edges frayed, but the words written on it were unmistakable. Dead end, turn around. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen this sign before, and he was certain there had been no indication that the road was coming to an end. The winding path had seemed to go on forever, and yet, here he was staring at a sign that told him he had reached a dead end. His mind raced, trying to understand how he had missed it. Maybe he had taken a wrong turn earlier, without realizing it, or maybe the road had been altered in some way. Either way, there was no turning back now. He had to make a decision. He could turn around and retrace his steps, but something inside him made him hesitate. As he sat there, staring at the road sign, the air around him felt heavier. The stillness outside was oppressive, and the silence felt suffocating. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that he was being watched. His thoughts began to swirl, and the quiet sound of his breathing filled the car, each inhale and exhale louder than before. Suddenly, the headlights flickered again, and this time, they didn't come back on. The darkness enveloped him, and the hum of the engine ceased. For a brief, terrifying moment, Jacob was left in complete darkness, unable to see a single thing outside the car. His heart raced as panic gripped him. He fumbled with the keys, trying desperately to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. A noise, distant at first, began to echo in the silence. It was faint, almost inaudible, but as it grew louder, it became unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, the sound of someone walking just outside his car. His breath hitched in his throat as he strained to listen. The footsteps weren't human. They were too heavy, too deliberate. It was something else, something that was moving toward him, slowly, like it was savoring the moment. Jacob's pulse pounded in his ears as he grabbed the door handle, ready to bolt from the car and run. But the door wouldn't open. He tugged at it again and again, but it was stuck, as if something was blocking him from escaping. The footsteps grew closer, and with them, the air became colder, like the temperature had dropped by several degrees. The car suddenly jolted, the headlights flashing on and off sporadically, and in that brief flicker of light, Jacob saw something, or rather someone, standing at the edge of his window. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by shadow. It was staring at him, unmoving, its presence suffocating. Jacob's heart raced in his chest, and his mind screamed for him to do something, anything. But he was frozen in place. His hand trembled as he reached for the car's emergency brake, hoping that he could somehow regain control. But the figure outside the window didn't move. It just stood there, staring, waiting. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped, the car's engine roared to life, and the headlights flickered back on, illuminating the road ahead. But the figure was gone. Jacob didn't wait another moment. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal and sped down the road, the car's tires screeching as they tore through the pavement. He didn't care where the road led anymore. He just had to get away. He didn't look back. The feeling of being followed, of being hunted, gnawed at him as he drove, the trees blurring into a dark tunnel around him. The road, which had once seemed endless, now felt like a trap, a winding path that led nowhere. It wasn't until he saw the first sign of civilization, a faint light in the distance, that he dared to breathe again. When he finally reached the gas station a few miles down the road, he slammed the car into park and jumped out, gasping for air. He didn't know what he had just experienced, but something told him it wasn't over. The strange car he had passed earlier, the eerie sign, and the footsteps, it was all too real. He wasn't alone. As he filled his tank, a sudden chill ran down his spine, and he glanced around nervously. There was no one else at the station, but as he looked into the reflection in the glass door of the convenience store, he saw something, a shadow, tall and dark, standing just behind him. He froze, heart racing in his chest. But when he turned around, the station was empty. There was no one there. But Jacob didn't need to turn around again. He already knew. The figure, the road, the dead end, they were all part of something much darker. And now, it was following him. The night had fallen, and the quiet stillness of the house was only broken by the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards underfoot. Sarah had been sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, the soft glow of the screen illuminating her face. She'd been hired to babysit a 5-year-old boy named Max for the evening, a job she had taken out of convenience. Her plans had fallen through, and the offer to make some extra cash for a few hours of watching TV while a child slept seemed like a good idea. Max had been an unusual child from the start. When Sarah had arrived at the house earlier in the evening, his mother had greeted her with a warm smile, though her eyes were heavy with worry. She briefly explained that Max was a quiet boy and a bit shy, and that he might be a little difficult to handle at first. She mentioned he had a strange habit of not speaking much, but she reassured Sarah that there was nothing to worry about. Just let him be and he would eventually warm up. The mother's instructions were clear, and Sarah had quickly agreed. After a short conversation about bedtime routines and emergency contacts, Max's mother left for the night, leaving Sarah alone in the spacious house with the boy. At first, Max was indeed quiet,
sitting in the corner of the living room with his stuffed bear. His wide eyes seemed to watch everything. Though he said very little, he didn't ask for snacks, didn't speak about his toys, or even make much noise as he moved about the room. Sarah tried to strike up a conversation with him, asking about his favorite cartoons and what he liked to do for fun, but Max only stared at her blankly, never offering more than a soft smile or a quick nod. As the evening wore on, the silence between them grew more oppressive. Max never left his spot, and Sarah, feeling the strange weight of his gaze, began to feel uneasy. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the noise of the TV in the background, but her attention kept drifting back to the little boy sitting so still, staring at nothing in particular. Eventually, Sarah decided it was time for Max to go to bed. She stood up from the couch and walked over to him, gently taking his hand to help him up. "It's time to go to bed, Max. Your mom will be back in the morning," she said softly, trying to sound reassuring. But Max didn't move. He didn't even look at her. "Max, it's bedtime. Let's get you settled," she repeated, this time more firmly. To her surprise, Max stood up on his own, his movements stiff and mechanical, as though he was not entirely in control of his body. His eyes remained fixed on the wall ahead, never meeting hers. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. She'd read about children who had trouble adjusting to babysitters, but this felt different. This felt off. She led Max to his room, which was on the second floor of the house. As they walked down the dimly lit hallway, Sarah noticed that the walls seemed to close in around her, the silence growing thicker with each step. She tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on her overactive imagination, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Max's small hand was cold, almost unnaturally so. Once they reached his bedroom, Sarah turned on the night light and pulled back the covers of the bed. She guided Max to lie down, but he didn't get in. Instead, he stood motionless by the side of the bed, his eyes fixed on the floor, his breath shallow and rapid. "Max, it's okay. Just lie down, and we can read a story," Sarah said gently, trying to soothe him, but her words seemed to have no effect. She took a step closer to him, reaching out to guide him onto the bed. When he finally spoke, "I'm not supposed to be here," he whispered, his voice barely audible, a strained edge to it. Sarah froze. The words struck her like a blow. It was the first time he had spoken since she had arrived. She had assumed from the way he had acted all evening that he was simply shy or withdrawn, but now he seemed different, like there was something deeply unsettling beneath the surface. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Max lifted his head slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his gaze, something that wasn't the usual childlike curiosity. It was fear, fear that wasn't entirely his own. "I'm not supposed to be here," Max repeated, his voice growing even softer, like he was speaking to someone else entirely. "They don't want me here." Sarah's mind raced. Who was he talking about? Who didn't want him here? She tried to smile, to ease the tension, but the look in Max's eyes made it impossible to ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. "Max, you're safe. You're with me, okay?" she said, her voice more tentative than before. She took a step back, uncertain of what to do next. The room suddenly felt much colder, and the soft hum of the house seemed to grow louder in her ears. Max didn't move. He remained standing by the bed, staring at her with those wide, unblinking eyes. Then, as if suddenly remembering, he turned away from her and walked to the far side of the room. Sarah watched in stunned silence as he stood in front of a large mirror mounted on the wall, his reflection staring back at him with an eerie stillness. For a moment, Max just stood there, gazing at his reflection, his tiny hand pressed against the glass. It seemed to Sarah like he was lost in some strange trance, his gaze unfocused and distant. "Max," Sarah called, her voice wavering with uncertainty. "Max, honey, come on, it's bedtime." But Max didn't respond. Instead, He reached up and touched the mirror again, this time more forcefully, as though he was trying to pull something from it. His breath quickened, a soft panting that made Sarah's skin crawl. She took a step toward him, but just as her hand was about to touch his shoulder, something happened. A faint tapping sound came from the other side of the room, the sound of something small and delicate knocking 3 times on the floor. It was coming from the direction of the door. Sarah's blood ran cold. The sound was soft, but unmistakable. She turned quickly toward the door, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since she had arrived at the house, she felt utterly and completely afraid. "Max," she whispered, her voice trembling. Max didn't respond. His face was pale now, almost translucent, his body rigid with fear. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at the door. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, he spoke again. "They're here." A chill swept through the room, and the temperature seemed to plummet. Sarah felt a coldness, like she had never known. She reached out to grab Max's hand, but as her fingers brushed his skin, she realized it wasn't warm. There was no warmth at all. Max's skin felt like ice. She turned toward the door, the tapping growing louder, almost like footsteps now, coming from the hallway, just outside the room. But there was no one there. Max's eyes were locked on the door, and his lips parted, as if he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. The room grew darker, and Sarah could see nothing but the shadows creeping along the walls. The whispers started then, soft at first, but growing louder by the second. Low, menacing voices, calling out from somewhere, just beyond the edge of the room. And then she saw it, a shape, dark and indistinct, sliding across the far corner of the room. It moved quickly, almost too quickly, and Sarah felt a cold gust of air rush past her, like a presence slipping by. She turned to Max, but he was gone. His spot by the bed was empty. The mirror that had once reflected his image now showed only the shadowed room behind her, and in the glass, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The figure of a small child, standing in the doorway, watching her. It wasn't Max. She froze, unable to look away. The child in the mirror moved closer, its small pale hand pressing against the glass, as it stared at her with wide, empty eyes. "Max," she whispered, her voice breaking. But when she turned, the room was empty. Max had vanished. Clara had never been one for nostalgia. She didn't spend her evenings flipping through old photo albums or dwelling on past memories. She was always looking ahead, always planning the next step. But that evening, for some reason, she felt compelled to dig through the old box of family photos her grandmother had passed down to her years ago. It wasn't unusual for her to pull out the box from time to time, but that night, the memory of it came to her suddenly, like a whisper calling her attention. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Clara lived alone in a small, one-story home she had inherited after her grandmother's passing. It was a charming little house, but sometimes, especially in the dead of night, it felt too empty, too still. She found the old photo box in the closet, tucked away on the top shelf. It wasn't heavy, but it was worn with age. Sturdy cardboard that had been used and opened more times than Clara could count. She pulled it down carefully and placed it on the dining table, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the box. The air around her seemed a little colder now, a little more still. Clara sat down and opened it slowly, the familiar scent of old paper and fading ink filling her nose. Inside, there were dozens of photographs, some yellowing with age, others still bright but fading at the edges. There were family photos from different generations, pictures of her grandparents when they were young, snapshots of her parents when they were newly married, and pictures of Clara as a child. She smiled faintly as she flipped through the pages. Her parents had always been happy when they were younger, before the divorce, before life's stresses took a toll on them. She stopped on one photograph, a picture of her as a little girl, sitting on her father's lap with a wide grin. She'd forgotten about this one, It was taken on her 7th birthday, and she remembered how her father had lifted her high into the air, spinning her around, making her laugh. But as her eyes moved over the picture, something about it felt strange. The photo was taken in the backyard of their old house, and there, standing just behind her father, was a woman she didn't recognize. She was blurry at first, but Clara squinted and took a closer look. The woman had long dark hair and was dressed in a simple old-fashioned dress, nothing like the clothes people wore back then. Her face wasn't fully visible, but Clara could make out the faint outline of it, though something about it seemed off. The figure was in the background, just a shadow in the corner of the image, but it was undeniably there. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had looked through this album a dozen times before, and she was certain she had never seen this woman before. She turned the page quickly, shaking off the uneasy feeling that settled in her chest. There were more photos, but none that caught her attention until she reached a particular one, an image of her family on a trip to the beach. Her parents, much younger in this one, were holding hands, smiling in the sun. Clara, no older than 4 or 5, was standing between them, her tiny hand gripping her father's finger. The waves rolled in the background, and the sky was clear and blue. But once again, Clara's eyes were drawn to something else. Standing behind them, just at the edge of the photo, was the same woman, the one from the earlier picture. This time, she was closer, and her face was slightly clearer, though still oddly obscured, as though it were out of focus. Clara could see her features more distinctly now. The same long dark hair, the same old-fashioned dress, and an expression on her face that Clara couldn't quite describe. Something unreadable and distant. The woman was staring directly at the camera, her eyes wide and unblinking. Clara's heart began to race. This was impossible. She had no memory of this woman. She didn't even recognize the figure. Why hadn't she noticed this before? Why hadn't anyone else? She flipped the page again, more urgently this time, but every photo after that was just as unsettling. The woman appeared in several other family pictures, always standing just behind someone, always lurking in the background, her presence unmistakable. She wasn't in the foreground, not in a way that would draw attention, but she was there, always watching, always waiting. The last photo in the album was one that made Clara freeze completely. It was a picture of a family reunion that had taken place when Clara was in her 20s. Her parents, her aunts and uncles, and a few cousins were gathered together for a group shot. Clara stood at the front, smiling brightly, with her arm around her mother. But there, in the far corner of the photo, was the woman, just a shadow of her form, standing by a tree, partially obscured by the branches. This time, Clara could see her clearly. The woman's face was no longer blurry. She was staring straight at Clara, her expression cold and emotionless. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized something even more disturbing. The woman's features were exactly like hers. Her own face, only older, with darker eyes and a hardened expression. She was staring at her through the photograph, as though she were looking into her own reflection. Clara's hands began to tremble. Her mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be possible. There had to be an explanation, some rational explanation, but she couldn't find one. The same woman had appeared throughout the photos, all these years, from her childhood to the present, and now, it was clear. The woman was her asterisk. Clara snapped the album shut, her heart racing. Her mind felt like it was spinning. She couldn't breathe. She needed air. She stood up quickly and rushed toward the window, throwing open the curtains to let the night air in. Her pulse was erratic, her head swimming with confusion and fear. She didn't understand what was happening. How was this possible? Was someone playing a sick joke on her? She glanced back at the photo album, now closed on the table, and then her gaze shifted to the mirror across the room. There, in the reflection, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Standing behind her, just barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. The woman. Clara turned around, but the room was empty. Her heart pounded as she moved cautiously toward the mirror, her reflection staring back at her. Her breath quickened, her eyes darting across the room. The woman wasn't there. She hadn't been there. But as Clara's hand hovered over the album, a voice broke the silence. "You're not supposed to be here." Clara froze, the words ringing in her ears. She didn't know where they came from, whether it was in her mind, or if she had actually heard them aloud. But as the echo of the voice lingered in the air, she knew one thing for certain. The woman had always been there, lurking in the background, and now, it seemed, she was coming closer.
The motel sat just off Route 17, far enough from town that most people passed it without a second glance. A faded vacancy sign flickered erratically in the window, like it was struggling to stay alive. The paint on the exterior had long since peeled away, and the smell of mildew hung thick in the air. The kind of place you check into when you're desperate, not when you have choices. Jake didn't have choices. He'd been driving for 13 hours straight, his car filled with boxes, leftover food containers, and the lingering tension of a failed relationship. He wasn't running from anything, or at least that's what he told himself. He just needed distance. A break from the noise of the city. Somewhere quiet to think. The receptionist didn't ask questions. She handed him a rusty key with a plastic tag that read Room 6, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her fingers were long, too long, and her skin had a strange, paper-dry texture that Jake noticed when their hands briefly touched. "Just one night," he muttered. She didn't respond. The hallway was dim, the carpet soaked in years of grime. The door to Room 6 stuck before it gave way with a loud creak. Inside, the room was as expected. Outdated, stained wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a TV bolted to the dresser with missing buttons. Jake tossed his bag on the bed and let out a long breath. He told himself he was too tired to care. But even then, something felt wrong. The air was too still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. And the mirror over the sink had smudges that looked like fingerprints, despite the room supposedly being cleaned. He ignored it, took a quick shower, ate a sandwich, tried watching the TV, but only static played on every channel. That night, he dreamt of knocking. Not from the door, but from inside the walls. A rhythmic, almost polite tapping. He didn't wake up scared. He woke up confused. The room was colder than it had been. His breath fogged slightly in the air, and the clock on the nightstand blinked 3:11 a.m., frozen. He stood up, rubbed his arms, and heard it again. Knock. 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 This time from the closet. It didn't make sense. The closet was small, empty. He'd checked it earlier. But now, the door stood slightly ajar, and the knocking came again, softer, like fingernails brushing against wood. He stepped toward it slowly, every instinct in his body telling him not to. But Jake had always been the kind of person who needed proof, needed to see the monster under the bed before he believed in it. He flung the door open. Empty. He let out a shaky laugh, turned to go back to bed, and stopped cold. There was a figure in the mirror. Not his reflection. Standing behind him, tall, thin, a face half in shadow, half in some grotesque smile that stretched far too wide. Its eyes were sunken holes, and something dripped from its fingertips, black and thick like tar. Jake spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, silent again. But when he looked back at the mirror, it was cracked. A single jagged fracture running down the center. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the crack was gone. The receptionist was gone too. Jake banged on the counter, looked around, but no one answered. No cars in the lot except his. No other guests. The air smelled worse now, like something rotting behind the walls. He should have left then. Packed his stuff and driven until the motel was just a speck in the rearview mirror. But he didn't. Something held him there. Curiosity, or maybe something darker. He stayed another night. The knocking began earlier this time. And it wasn't just the closet. It came from the floorboards, from the walls, from the ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. Always 3 times, always slow. And then came the voice. Faint, garbled, like a cassette tape playing underwater. You see it now, don't you? Jake sat frozen on the edge of the bed. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. You let it in. The mirror shattered. No impact, no reason. Just exploded, spider webbing out from the center like something had punched it from the other side. Jake backed away, blood running cold. From the shards, the figure emerged. Not a reflection anymore. It crawled out of the glass slowly as though pulling itself from another world. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way. No eyes, just black holes where they should be. Its smile never moved, but its voice echoed in Jake's mind. "You were the key." Jake ran. Out of the room, down the hallway, into the lobby, empty. He grabbed his keys and burst into the parking lot. His car wouldn't start. No click, no engine noise, just silence. Behind him, all the motel doors creaked open in unison. Every single one. Figures stood in each doorway, each of them wearing the same grotesque smile. All tall, all faceless, all dripping that same inky substance onto the ground. Jake screamed. He ran into the woods behind the motel, branches tearing at his clothes, his lungs burning with cold night air. He didn't stop until the sun began to rise. When he finally looked back, there was no motel. Just a dirt road. An empty clearing, like it had never been there. Jake tried reporting it. The police found nothing, no building, no foundation, nothing on the maps. They told him he'd had a breakdown. Stress, isolation, too much caffeine, maybe even drugs. But Jake knows what he saw. He knows what followed him. Because now, every night at 3:11 a.m., no matter where he is, the knocking returns, always 3 times. Always from somewhere too close. And in every mirror he passes, he sees a crack starting to form, waiting for him to stop watching, just long enough for it to come through again. It started with a missing dog. Old Man Harrow lived 3 houses down from Emily and her parents. He was one of those shut-in types, grumpy, quiet, eyes always watching from behind dusty curtains. People said he'd once been a butcher, but no one really knew. What they did know was that he lived alone, never had guests, and never smiled. When Emily's golden retriever Max vanished one rainy Thursday evening, she knew something was wrong. Max never ran off. He was old, slow, and loyal. Always came back when called. But that night, he didn't return from the yard. They searched the neighborhood with flashlights, calling his name until their voices were hoarse. Nothing. Just the sound of wet leaves crunching under their boots and the hiss of wind through the trees. Emily swore she heard barking at one point, faint, like it was coming from underground, but her parents brushed it off as her imagination. The next day, she noticed something odd. A smear of red on Harrow's back porch. It looked like blood. Fresh. Like someone had tried to clean it, but gave up halfway. She told her dad, who just sighed and said Harrow probably cut himself or something. "Don't go near his house," he warned. "The man's not right in the head." But Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she snuck out. She waited until her parents were asleep, slipped on her hoodie, and took Max's old leash with her. Just in case. Rain had started to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, soaking through her shoes as she made her way to Harrow's property. His house loomed in the dark like something forgotten by time. The yard was overgrown, bushes twisted like gnarled hands. Windows glared like hollow eyes. Emily's heart pounded so hard she was sure he'd hear it. But the house was silent. She crept around to the backyard, where she'd seen the blood. The porch creaked under her weight, but no lights turned on. She crouched, inspecting the dark stain. It was still wet. That's when she heard it. A low, whimpering sound, like a dog, muffled, coming from beneath the porch. There was a small hatch partially hidden by dead leaves, rusted shut at the edges but with a handle. Emily hesitated, then pulled. It groaned open, revealing a narrow, dirt tunnel descending into darkness. The smell hit her first. Rot. Copper. Old meat. She gagged but climbed down, using her phone's flashlight to guide the way. The tunnel was tight, damp walls pressing in. The barking grew louder, frantic now. And then she found the door. A thick metal slab embedded into the earth. The kind you see in slaughterhouses. It had a sliding peephole, smeared with something she didn't want to identify. Emily tried the handle. It opened. What lay beyond wasn't a basement. It was a butcher's chamber. Chains hung from the ceiling. Hooks. A large wooden table stained black with age and use. Shelves lined with jars, some containing animal parts. Others weren't so easy to identify. Max was there, caged in the corner, whimpering, fur matted with blood that didn't seem to be his. Emily rushed to him, sobbing with relief, fumbling with the cage lock. But as she struggled, something behind her clicked. The door had closed, and she wasn't alone. Old Man Harrow stepped from the shadows. He wasn't surprised to see her. In fact, he looked almost pleased. I was wondering how long it would take someone to come looking. His voice was calm. Too calm, like he was discussing the weather. Emily backed away, clutching Max. Her flashlight shook in her hand, the beam trembling across the room. Harrow smiled, revealing yellowed teeth and a glint of metal behind his lower lip. Something embedded there. A hook? Used to be just the dogs, he continued. Then the cats, but they weren't enough. Not anymore. You'd be amazed how fast it escalates. What you start doing out of curiosity becomes habit. Emily screamed. She grabbed the nearest object, a glass jar, and hurled it at him. It shattered, slicing across his cheek. He staggered but didn't fall. She snatched a rusty bone saw from the table and swung. This time, he fell. She didn't wait to see if he'd stay down. She unlocked Max's cage and ran, dragging him behind her through the tunnel. Up the hatch, into the rain. When she burst into her house, she was covered in mud and blood, shaking so hard she could barely speak. Her parents called the cops. They didn't believe her at first, not until they found the tunnel. Not until they found what Harrow had buried in his backyard. Bones. Dozens of them. Some animal, some not. He was arrested, but something was off. He didn't resist, just smiled as they cuffed him, whistled an old nursery rhyme the entire ride to the station, and that night, Max went missing again. The doors were locked, windows shut, but he was gone. Emily checked the yard, the street, even the woods. She found him the next morning, hanging from a tree, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut, a note pinned to his collar. You opened the door, now you can't close it. After that, the dreams started, of chains, of hooks, of cold, blood-slick walls. Every night, the same, and every morning something new was dead in their neighborhood. Birds, squirrels, a neighbor's cat. Then a kid went missing. Then another. People started whispering about curses, about haunted ground. But Emily knew the truth. Old Man Harrow was still in jail, but something else had been waiting in that tunnel, something that had used him. And now that the door had been opened again, it didn't need him anymore. It started with a phone call that shouldn't have been possible. Leah Morgan, a forensic analyst in Chicago, had just wrapped up a late-night crime scene when her phone rang. It was from her younger sister, Hannah. The problem was, Hannah had been dead for 9 years, killed in a brutal home invasion that was never solved. Her body was found with her eyes removed, mouth sewn shut, and hands placed neatly across her chest. Leah froze, staring at the caller ID. Hannah Morgan. Shaking, she answered. At first there was nothing, just static. Then, barely audible, a voice. It's not over. Then silence. She dropped the phone. That night, Leah couldn't sleep. She kept hearing footsteps in the hallway of her apartment, even though she lived alone. A low humming came from the vents, faint, almost musical. She checked them all. Nothing. Her apartment was cold, the kind of cold that sits inside your bones. In the morning, she dismissed it all as exhaustion, work stress, trauma resurfacing, until the photos started appearing. Black and white Polaroids slipped under her door in the early hours. The first showed a blurry image of her bedroom, taken from the inside. The next, her asleep. The third, her sitting on her couch, but with someone behind her, someone wearing a stitched burlap mask. Leah checked all her locks, set up cameras, called the police. They found no signs of a break-in. Days passed. The humming got louder. Her lights flickered at 3:33 a.m. every night, without fail. She started noticing things moved around while she was gone, just subtle enough to question her memory. She finally told her best friend Elijah, who worked with her in forensics. He insisted they check the call logs. When they did, the system showed no incoming call from any number on the night in question. But her phone had recorded it. She still had the voicemail. When Elijah listened to it, his face went pale. That wasn't Hannah, he whispered. That wasn't human. They enhanced the audio. Buried beneath the voice was another layer, a whispering chorus, unintelligible, overlapping. But one phrase repeated clearly, "Come home, come see." Leah hadn't stepped foot in her childhood home since the murder. The house had been left abandoned, sealed off after the police failed to solve the crime. No one wanted to buy it. No one dared. But now, something was calling her back. Elijah begged her not to go, but Leah felt driven by something she couldn't explain. Like the house had a thread wrapped around her spine, pulling her. She went at night. Of course. The air was heavy with mildew. The grass overgrown. Windows shattered, but not from the outside. It looked like something had clawed out. Inside, the house was exactly how it had been the day after the murder. Police tape still dangling from the staircase. Dust thick on every surface. And yet Leah swore she could smell her mother's perfume. Hear Hannah's music box playing from upstairs. She found the music box in Hannah's room, sitting open, unwound, still playing. That's when she noticed it. A new door in the hallway that hadn't been there before. Thin, wooden, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Her chest tightened. Every instinct told her not to open it. She opened it anyway. The door creaked into a narrow stairwell leading downward, impossibly deep for a 2-story house. Walls wet with black mold. The further she descended, the colder it got. And then, the humming returned. But now it was voices, hundreds, singing, sobbing, whispering. Some cried her name. At the bottom she found a room. A single bulb swayed from the ceiling. The floor was covered in Polaroids, hundreds of them. Every picture was of her. From every year. Every month. Every day since Hannah died, someone had been watching her. For 9 years. And at the center of the room was a chair. And in that chair sat Hannah. Her eyes had been sewn shut again. Her mouth sealed with black thread, was fresh. Not rotted, her skin pale but intact, like she had just died yesterday. Leah backed away, only to bump into someone. A tall figure stood behind her. Same burlap mask, same stitched grin. He didn't speak, just tilted his head, then pointed to a wall covered in symbols, drawn in blood. She turned again, and Hannah was gone, the chair now empty. But her voice came from inside Leah's head. Run. The light bulb exploded. Leah bolted, stumbling up the stairs, chased by the thunder of dozens of feet pounding the steps behind her, though she never turned to look. She burst into the hallway, and the door was gone. Just drywall. She screamed, clawing at it, and then it crumbled, revealing her standing in the hallway of her apartment. The door to her childhood home behind her. Gone. Elijah found her the next morning, unconscious on the floor. She was clutching a Polaroid of herself. Standing in Hannah's room with Hannah behind her, smiling. No stitched mouth, no death in her eyes, just Hannah. Alive. When the police returned to the childhood home, the address led them to an empty lot. There was no house. There hadn't been one in over 50 years. A fire had burned it down in 1971. The Morgan family hadn't lived there. In fact, they never existed. Records showed Leah was an only child. No sister, no Hannah. Elijah didn't believe it. He remembered her. But when he looked through his own phone, all the photos of Leah and Hannah together were gone. Every memory scrubbed. Every trace. And Leah? She disappeared 3 nights later. Her apartment left open. Music box still playing. Last footage on her security cam showed her standing in the hallway at exactly 3:33 a.m., eyes closed, humming. As someone opened the door to the hidden stairwell behind her,